On a small island they came across during their journey, the boy suddenly declared his desire to expel Lame from his squad, and this unexpected demand immediately hung in the air like a heavy shadow. The young man was stunned by such straightforwardness. He did not expect this, and with unpleasant surprise asked again what exactly the interlocutor meant, trying to make sure he was not mistaken. However, the boy was not going to explain anything. He repeated his request without hesitation once more, cutting off all hopes that it was just a slip of the tongue. 2 years ago, the hero joined this group of travelers by invitation, but now their very leader, the same Mole, was persistently demanding his expulsion. The team consisted of Mole, the leader himself, the powerful warrior Jack, the sorceress Emily, and accordingly the young man himself, who until recently considered himself part of their family. Confused, the young man asked to explain the reason in more detail, since such a decision appeared too suddenly and seemed unfair, like a cold knife in the back. He reminded that if he left, the squad would lose his rare skill of good growth, which helped them develop faster and could be useful even now. However, Mole was unshakable. He did not doubt his decision and stated that even such an ability had lost its value because the group no longer needed it. The young man was at a loss, as his arguments were losing strength. In the native land of Eden, everyone was born with their own skill, and without it existence seemed impossible. Among the skills there were both everyday ones like finding things and combat ones such as extraordinary strength. There were also harmful ones like clumsiness or incomprehensible ones resembling luck. Lame's skill of good growth belonged to the rare and valuable ones, as it could affect not only a person but also everything around, revealing hidden possibilities. Its effect consisted in accelerating development. Thanks to it, the level of adventurers grew 3 times faster. Victory even over one monster brought multiple experience. Moreover, the ability affected plants and animals. Livestock grew healthy, vegetables became large and juicy, as if nature itself obeyed him. For a simple peasant, this gift was priceless. It was precisely because of this skill that adventurers noticed him, persistently inviting him to their squad. Later, he noticed how all team members rapidly raised their levels after his joining. That is why he was now surprised why the skill was no longer needed. The leader admitted that good growth was indeed useful, but added that they had already become strong enough to manage without it and move forward on their own. Recently, they had stopped leveling up, probably having reached their limit, and therefore considered that Lame's ability had lost all meaning. So in the eyes of the squad, his skill became useless. In battle, he proved powerless, and therefore the adventurers saw no benefit in his further presence. Moreover, as Crit frankly noted, money was being spent on him, so he became a burden that only drained their resources. For the leader, the youth's value turned out to be not zero, but negative. He saw in him not an ally, but an obstacle that held them back. The hero got angry because he performed many tasks besides using the ability: cooking food, cleaning, buying necessary supplies, yet this was also unappreciated. Jack exploded with a scream, ordering to stop the self-praise. He considered Lame a weakling, incapable of defeating even the simplest monsters on his own. Emily, along with the rest, confidently stood on the squad's side. She emphasized that they were an elite team, and his presence as an ordinary assistant looked like parasitism. The youth was stunned by their words. After all, once when he joined, they were at a low level and barely managed even weak enemies. It was his ability that allowed them to grow again and again, until they became S-rank heroes who effortlessly completed the most dangerous tasks. But when they reached their limit, the boy became useless. They began to insult and humiliate him, and the offensive words cut to the heart, fueling anger. Crit tried to convince him that he himself had to understand. Extremely difficult trials awaited them ahead, and it was no longer possible to cover for him. The upcoming journey was full of danger, and carrying a burden meant risking not only himself but the entire team. The leader threw him the last words: "Do whatever you want." He even advised returning to his native village or finding work elsewhere, because the skill would still be needed by someone. After that, the adventurers set off for the ship moored to continue their journey. Crit waved goodbye, and that was the end of it. On a small island they came across during the journey, the boy suddenly declared his desire to expel Lame from his squad, and this unexpected demand immediately hung in the air like a heavy shadow. The young man was stunned by such straightforwardness. He did not expect it, and asked again with unpleasant surprise what exactly the interlocutor meant, trying to make sure he was not mistaken. However, the boy was not going to explain anything. He repeated his request without hesitation once more, cutting off all hopes that it was just a slip of the tongue. 2 years ago, the hero joined this group of travelers by invitation, but now their very leader, the same Crit, was persistently demanding his expulsion. The team consisted of Crit, the leader himself, the powerful warrior Jack, the sorceress Emily, and accordingly the young man himself, who until recently considered himself part of their family. Confused, the young man asked for a more detailed explanation of the reason, since such a decision appeared too suddenly and seemed unfair, like a cold knife in the back. He reminded that if he left, the squad would lose his rare skill of good growth, which helped them develop faster and could be useful even now. However, Krot was unwavering. He did not doubt his decision and stated that even such an ability had lost its value because the group no longer needed it. The young man was confused, as his arguments were losing strength. In the native land of Eden, everyone was born with their own skill, and without it, existence seemed impossible. Among the skills were both everyday ones, like finding things, and combat ones, such as extraordinary strength. There were also harmful ones, like clumsiness, or incomprehensible ones, similar to luck. Lama's skill of good growth belonged to the rare and valuable, as it could affect not only a person but also everything around, revealing hidden possibilities. Its effect was in accelerating development. Thanks to it, the adventurer's level grew 3 times faster. Victory even over one monster brought multiple experience. Moreover, the ability influenced plants and animals. Livestock grew healthy, vegetables became large and juicy, as if nature itself obeyed him. For a simple peasant, this gift was priceless. It was precisely because of this skill that adventurers noticed him, persistently inviting him to their squad. Later, he noticed how all team members rapidly raised their levels after his joining. That is why now he was surprised why the skill was no longer needed. The leader admitted that good growth was indeed useful, but added that they had already become strong enough to manage without it and move forward on their own. Recently, they had stopped leveling up, probably having reached their limit, and therefore considered that Lama's ability had lost all meaning. So in the eyes of the squad, his skill became useless. In battle, he proved powerless, and therefore the adventurers saw no benefit in his further presence. Moreover, as Crit frankly noted, money was spent on him, so he became a burden that only drained their resources. For the leader, the value of the young man turned out to be not zero, but negative. He saw in him not an ally, but an obstacle that held them back. The hero got angry because he was doing many tasks besides using his ability: cooking food, cleaning, buying necessary supplies, and this was also unappreciated. Jack burst out shouting, ordering to stop the self-praise. He considered Lime a weakling, incapable of independently defeating even the simplest monsters. Emily, along with the rest, confidently stood on the side of the squad. She emphasized that they were an elite team, and his presence as an ordinary assistant looked like parasitism. The young man was stunned by their words. After all, once when he joined, they were at a low level and barely managed even weak enemies. It was his ability that allowed them to grow again and again, until they became S-rank heroes who easily completed the most dangerous tasks. But when they reached their limit, the boy became unnecessary. They began to insult and humiliate him, and the offensive words cut to the heart, fueling anger. Crit tried to convince him that he himself had to understand. Extremely difficult trials awaited them ahead, and he could no longer be covered. The upcoming journey was full of danger, and keeping a burden with them meant risking not only himself but the entire team. The leader threw him the last words: "Do what you want." He even advised returning to the native village or finding work elsewhere, because the skill might still be needed by someone. After that, the adventurers set off for the ship moored to continue their journey. Crit waved goodbye, and that was the end. The hero immediately assumed that the large house might belong to some aristocrat, because only wealthy people can afford such luxury. Recently, the rich have started keeping beast people as a decoration of their status, so probably these children were once kept for the same reason. But beast people were stronger than ordinary children, and if treated the same way, it could easily lead to dangerous incidents. Moreover, they had animal habits. Dogs need daily walks, and cats need special places for their claws, otherwise they suffer. It often happened that when care became too troublesome, owners simply abandoned them. It seems the owner of these children did exactly that. Thinking about this, the young man remembered his former friends. Both those and these are the same egoists who betray as soon as you stop being useful. Millie and her brother were very small. The hero estimated that they were no more than 5 or 6 years old, and this only increased his anxiety. If no one takes care of them, they simply will not survive. This thought depressed Lime and squeezed his heart with pain. Then he decided to introduce himself to the children and find out their names, to at least establish some trust between them. The boy was called Ryu, and the girl Millie. Despite his own problems, the young man sincerely rejoiced at the acquaintance. All 3 were abandoned. The meeting seemed like a sign of fate, and Lime wanted to do everything he could for them, starting with arranging a place to sleep. When he finished, it turned out to be a bed prepared immediately for all. The brother and sister were surprised that someone cared about them so sincerely. The boy showed how to properly stack hay so that it would be soft and warm. Ryu enthusiastically praised him, and Millie thanked him with a gentle smile. It was time to rest. The rain did not stop, and the young man, exhausted by the day's events, felt himself being overcome by sleep. Falling asleep, he smelled hay. It seemed strangely familiar to him, although he had never had such a bed. However, exhausted, he fell into a strange dream. Lime and the children slept peacefully on the improvised bed, and even the cows nearby seemed to share this peaceful rest with them. But in the dream, he felt something strange, heaviness from above, and suddenly a small fist hit him right in the face. Waking up, he saw Ryu and Millie. It turned out they had settled right on him in his sleep, creating this burden. He carefully moved them closer, covered them with a thicker layer of hay to keep them warmer, and lay down to rest again himself. When he first laid the bedding, the children touched it with curiosity and pleasure. The new bed seemed remarkably soft to them. Lime had no idea that everything would turn out exactly like that, but now another question arose: how to feed the little ones. He postponed it until morning. The clock showed 3:58. The hero jumped up on the bed, shouting that it was time to milk the cows, and woke up from his own scream. Quickly buttoning up his clothes, he grumbled at himself for his constant tardiness. Such mornings on the farm always began before dawn. Putting on a cap and entering the room, he greeted his colleague, but the latter immediately reprimanded him for being late. Then he warned him not to shout so loudly, because the cow named Lady might get scared and lose her rhythm. The young man apologized, and the colleague urged him to concentrate, since he was the heir to the farm and had to behave responsibly. Lime could not wait to work. He came from a family that had been engaged in farming and animal husbandry for generations. For a long time, their family managed the Fujisawa farm, and now the boy was studying to take over this business in the future. However, recently managing the farm had become increasingly difficult, as the family opened a coffee shop where they sold cheese, butter, soft ice cream, and other products. They were also involved in other activities, including farm tour where visitors could see the animals and try fresh products. Lime remained only an intern, so his duties were limited to caring for the cows and helping in the family cafe. He understood that one day he would have to take over all management. Although the boy did not consider himself skilled enough, the work was already bringing him satisfaction. The senior colleague observed his actions and praised him for a job well done, instilling confidence in him. Pre-milking was a necessary stage of work that had to be done before starting to obtain milk. First, it was necessary to touch the cow's hind legs so that the animal understood that milking time was approaching. Then you need to place the bucket, wipe the udder with a clean towel, disinfect your hands, and gently rub it. This helped to check the animal for mastitis and other diseases, but there was an even more important reason. When the udder was stimulated with warm hands, the happiness hormone, oxytocin, was produced, thanks to which the milk came out more easily. Young cows got sick less often, ate well, and were generally easy to care for. Lime calmed the impatient cow by promising that she would be next. When the check showed that everything was fine, he connected the milking machine. The mentor watched him carefully and thought that the boy looked a bit clumsy. He did not understand why Lime handled everything else well, but could not learn to wake up on time. He only apologized. Mornings were always difficult. The colleague decided not to reproach him anymore and suggested moving on to the next task, cleaning the premises and feeding. Since childhood, the father had taught Lime three main things: to ensure the cow's comfort during milking, to get clean milk, and to prevent diseases. He told his son to treat cows like princesses. Only then would they give tasty and high-quality milk. Time passed like this. The young man worked on the farm, although the conditions were far from ideal. After a hard day, he went to bed feeling satisfied with what he had done and confident that he would fall asleep instantly. But before that, he remembered that he needed to set the alarm clock, otherwise he risked oversleeping again. Opening his eyes in the morning, he suddenly jumped up, fearing that he had overslept the milking, but suddenly he froze, staring ahead in surprise. In front of him, the cow was still standing in the stall. He recalled that he had taken shelter from the rain in this barn and had fallen asleep right there. His movements woke the girl, who sleepily asked if something had happened. He wished Millie good morning while she rubbed her sleepy eyes. In his thoughts, the young man noted that his brother and sister were still nearby. He apologized for waking her, but the cat was already peeking out the window where the clear sky was shining. The hero also approached the window to assess the situation outside, but suddenly his face changed with surprise. Outside the window, there was a spacious clearing, despite being surrounded by dense bushes. Lime bent down and touched the grass. Its quality was good, and if the area was arranged, it could definitely be used for grazing livestock. He realized the truth of this thought, but something else troubled him. How did he know all this if he had never worked as a farmer before? Then he remembered his recent dream, which had been too realistic and strange, like a fragment of someone else's life. Lime assumed that these could be memories from a previous life, where he worked on a farm and had experience in agriculture. But he quickly dismissed this thought and turned to Millie, asking if the farm had an owner. The girl just shrugged; she did not know. She explained that she and her brother had lived here for about a month, and during all that time, no one had appeared. The boy was surprised. What did they eat then? Millie admitted that she and Ryu drank milk when they became hungry. They sat on the clearing, and the young man decided that the farm was indeed long abandoned, left to chance. Suddenly, a bold idea came to his mind. Maybe this was his chance. Whether memories from a past life or something else, he strangely knew how to properly handle cows. Moreover, he had another advantage, his rare growth skill. If he restored this farm, he could provide himself with everything necessary. The young man firmly decided never again to find himself in a situation where friends betray him and humiliate him with offensive words. He realized that former comrades only used him, and when they became strong, they discarded him. The memory ignited anger in him. Suddenly he stood up, full of determination to rely only on himself from now on. Millie asked fearfully what had happened to him. Fortunately, the farm still had at least a minimal set of tools, though old, but suitable for work. Wasting no time, he got down to business. The children came closer, curiously asking what he was doing. Lime explained that he was cleaning the cowshed. He felt sorry for the animals living in filth. If order was restored, the cows would give tasty milk. The children rejoiced upon hearing about the milk. The hero decided to involve them too, asking for help. After all, the faster they manage, the better it will be for everyone. Ryu gladly agreed and even asked to be relied on. Millie also did not want to stay aside, so the guy found them a job to gather old hay and take it outside. The children eagerly rushed to the pile of hay, ready to work with all their might for the promised milk. Lime was amazed by their agility. They turned out to be much more resilient than human children. The fresh hay turned out to be clean and suitable. The boy began spreading it in the stalls, creating a new bedding. He thanked the children. Now it had become much cleaner, and they proudly declared that they had tried their best. Next, it was necessary to take care of the water. There was a well nearby. It remained to check if it worked. Pressing the lever, the boy felt that it was rusty and barely moved. Ryu understood that Leimu could not manage alone and immediately volunteered to help. Together, they pressed the handle with all their strength, and finally the lever gave way. Water splashed into the bucket, and the children rejoiced at this discovery as if they had seen a miracle. The hero wiped sweat from his forehead and sighed with relief. Now they at least had water suitable for household needs. However, he understood that they would not be able to sleep with the cows. His gaze stopped at an old house nearby. He opened the door and went inside, where everything turned out to be neglected and gloomy. Inside there was disorder, and from the accumulated dust and trash, they and the children began to cough. But there was no choice. Lime suggested tidying up the house, although Ryu found it hard to endure being there because of the stuffiness. At first, they opened the windows to drive out the dust, armed themselves with rags and brushes, and tied scarves over their faces. Then they took out the trash and thoroughly cleaned the floor with a brush, trying to restore the rooms to their former appearance. Next, they wiped everything with rags, and the children eagerly crawled on the floor in different directions, energetically rubbing it. After some time, Lime and his helpers finished cleaning, and the house literally shone with cleanliness. Joy shone in the eyes of Ryu and Millie, and the boy noted that despite the minimal furniture, the dwelling had become surprisingly cozy. The brother and sister sincerely rejoiced that they now had their own home, especially the boy. He was happy that he could sleep peacefully. And suddenly their stomachs growled loudly. The hero remembered that they hadn't eaten anything for a long time. Millie added that there was almost no food left, and Ryu began to worry about what they should do now. Lime cheered up the children, promising that they would definitely come up with something, since from now on they would live together. He took on the role of mentor, explaining that now they must rely only on themselves and learn to obtain food on their own. The little ones, holding their empty stomachs, doubted whether they could handle it, but listened to him attentively. The young man encouraged them, promising to teach them everything, and suggested first looking for at least something edible. The brother and sister immediately began to look around, trying to find something. Ryu smelled something and approached a small cabinet, climbing in to check. Inside he found salt and pepper. This discovery pleased them greatly. The young man praised the little one, who joked that animal instincts are sometimes useful. The boy asked if that was enough, but Lime explained that spices are needed for cooking food, not as the main dish. Now having seasonings, they went outside to search for other food. The farm was huge, so Lime was sure that there would be edible herbs and mushrooms there. He decided to teach the children to distinguish between edible and poisonous, in case he was ever not around. During a walk in the forest, they found dandelion, parsley, and wormwood, all of which could be eaten. The boy called Ryu and asked him to remember, but the little one was already distracted by something else. He enthusiastically pulled out 2 large mushrooms with spots on their caps and asked Lime if they were edible. The hero pondered, as he had seen monsters resembling these mushrooms during his travels, and they were dangerous. He explained that bright mushrooms are usually poisonous, while edible ones are, on the contrary, inconspicuous and simple. The boy was upset, but Lime immediately called Millie and ordered her to remember this too, but the girl unexpectedly called him in a gentle voice. Only her ears were visible from the grass. She was looking for her brother and Lime, appearing quite strange. Ryu became worried, not understanding what exactly his sister was doing in the grass. Only her voice was heard from the thicket, and it looked even more mysterious. Lime took Millie in his arms, apologizing for being distracted and leaving her unattended. The girl was delighted to be lifted so high and happily asked for even higher. Lime hesitated but still agreed. The young man put Millie on his neck to give her a ride, but the girl started twisting and waving her arms so actively that he almost lost his balance, so he asked her to be more careful. She cheerfully shouted to her brother that it was very interesting and invited him to join, but Ryu just snorted and turned away, saying that he was not interested at all. However, it was clear that although he denied it, secretly he was still drawn to it, because he was sneakily peeking, trying to hide his interest. The boy mentally apologized, since he still could not lift 2 children on his shoulders at once. Suddenly Millie noticed juicy fruits on the tree and immediately asked what they were. It turned out to be cherries, a tasty berry from which you could make jam or bake pies. Barely hearing this, the girl instantly rushed upward, eager to try it first. The boy warned that it was dangerous, but Millie only smiled and assured him that she knew how to climb trees. Watching her, Lime was amazed each time. In just a moment she climbed so high, like a real cat. She picked a berry, held it in her hands for a moment, and then bit into it. The taste turned out to be both sour and sweet at the same time, and the girl liked it. Ryu from below indignantly called on his sister not to eat it all by herself. Hearing him, she threw a few berries down. Lime and Ryu gathered fruits into bowls, but the young man asked Millie to stop throwing them because there were already enough. He praised both children. Together they did a great job. They collected herbs, mushrooms, and cherries for dessert. Next, the hero began teaching them how to make a fire by arranging large stones in a circle. Then he showed how to properly stack the firewood so it would burn well, and to use straw and dry leaves for kindling. Ryu and Millie watched the flames with delight, although the young man himself saw nothing special in it. He remembered how Emily kindled fires with magic and taught him to cook in a cauldron, also her words that her magic was not for his amusement. When the fire flared up, it was possible to boil water in it and add ingredients. Then season everything with salt, pepper, and other spices. The children watched every move with fascination. The little one even wanted to peek directly into the cauldron, tempted by the smell, but the boy stopped him with his hand, warning that it was hot. Soon the herb and mushroom soup was ready. It was poured into 3 plates, and everyone wished each other a good meal. Lime and the children carefully sipped the hot broth. Ryu was delighted. He never thought that simple herbs could be so tasty. The young man agreed, adding that the mushrooms gave a special flavor, and after fatigue, the salty broth seemed like a real feast. Millie thought that Lime was incredible and also a good cook. He explained that he was responsible for cooking in the camp. Ryu buried his face in the plate to hide his emotions and muttered that he would eat the whole cauldron himself. The hero only asked him not to overeat. But the young man understood. You can't survive long on just herbs and mushrooms. The children needed more nutritious food. Ahead was a small fishing port, and Lime decided that there they could catch fish and mollusks, and later establish milk production. Then there would be an opportunity to trade it for vegetables and flour with the peasants, so the food problem would be solved. But suddenly a sound was heard. A calf was approaching them. Lime instantly realized that it was rushing straight at the children and was very close. A thought echoed in his head like a bell. They were in danger. The boy shouted at them to run. The hero shielded Ryu and Millie with his body, because even a skinny and slow calf could cause harm if it charged. The calf crashed into Lime while he tried to stop it by grabbing it with his arms. The children were frightened, and the young man was surprised at how strong even such a little one could be. Lime tried to calm the animal so it wouldn't get even more scared. There were no enemies nearby, and the young man tried to show the calf that no one would harm it. He gently patted it and guided it aside to lead it back. Then the boy turned to the children, asking if they were all right. The girl, still trembling with fear, answered affirmatively, and Ryu suddenly rushed to hug Lime, considering him the best. The boy acknowledged him as the strongest, convinced that now he and his sister were completely safe beside him. The hero was confused, not understanding why the boy suddenly became so gentle and trusting. He recalled how Millie recently rejoiced, sitting on his neck. It seemed these children desperately lacked love. He lifted Ryu in his arms, and he laughed joyfully, rolling on the hay, sincerely and carefree. Millie also wanted to play and asked to be lifted, since her brother had already had his share of fun. Turning the girl in his arms, Lime felt the desire to give them as much warmth as he could. Difficulties awaited them ahead, but now he understood that he needed these children no less than they needed him. For the first time in many years, the young man felt true happiness. 2 weeks passed, and the farm gradually began to take on the appearance of a real one. All the inhabitants worked for its development. Ryu and Millie diligently helped, and this was very important. And also, perhaps thanks to Lime's skill, the cows began to give milk daily. The boy was just thinking about future results when Ryu ran out with the news that some strange man had arrived. Lime asked in surprise who it was. Looking at the guest, he decided by his clothes and features that he resembled an aristocrat, but he doubted that there could be nobles on this island. The stranger looked straight at him. A man approached and greeted, then asked if it was Lime who arranged the area. Deciding that he was the owner, the young man confirmed the guess. Then he asked how much time it took to set up the farm. The hero honestly answered that it took about 2 weeks. The aristocrat was stunned. He could not believe that in 14 days the farm had changed so strikingly. He called the young man a genius or a master, which embarrassed him even more. Lime apologized and asked who this stranger was. The guest realized his abruptness and introduced himself. His name was Satya. It turned out that the aristocrat Satya was the ruler of the island. Hearing this, the young man froze. When he came to his senses, it was hard for him to believe. Ryu was also worried but did not understand the meaning of the word itself. Lime only wondered in surprise whether it was really true. He made a slight bow and signaled Ryu to repeat after him. Then he introduced himself and named the children. The aristocrat asked not to worry so much, since he and Lime were almost the same age. The hero reluctantly agreed, and Ryu directly, and with childlike sincerity, asked the gentleman who he was. Lime hurriedly pulled him back so he would not say too much. He asked the children to watch over the cows and bring them water. The boys set off to the farm, and the young man apologized to Satya for the behavior of the little ones, explaining that they did not mean to offend. The Lord took it with understanding, as they were just children. Lime noted that the ruler of the island looked younger than he had imagined. Satya asked how long the young man had been here and whether he had already registered. Lime was surprised to hear this. The Lord explained that he was collecting information about the island's inhabitants, their addresses, names, and other data for registration. This was necessary to know who lived on his land. Now Lime understood everything. Meanwhile, Satya unscrewed the top of his staff. Inside was a bundle of paper, a list for data collection. Based on it, registration could be processed. The boy agreed, surprised that the staff turned out to be a hiding place as well. The aristocrat clarified how many years he planned to stay here, and whether he was thinking of moving within the next 2 or 3 years. The young man thought for a moment, but decided that he would live here as he wished, and not alone, but together with Ryu and Millie. After a pause, he asked for permission to stay as long as possible, and this answer pleased the Lord. In fact, Satya had already heard that the young man with 2 beast children had settled on the farm. Despite the fact that they had arrived quite recently, they managed to revive the neglected place, and therefore the Lord did not object. Lime was glad of this news. But Satya added that there was one more question. Once there was a manager on the farm. But he lost his strength and died, leaving the estate. The peasants were worried, as no one wanted to take on this burden. The Lord asked Lime if he could restore the land. That would be a great help to the island. He warned that managing the farm would not be easy but promised support. Lime gladly agreed. Satya felt that the conversation was moving in the right direction. It would be unwise to let the boy go at such a moment. His work was truly impressive. He handed over a bundle of papers, and Lime asked what it was. The aristocrat replied, "These are tax documents." Hearing the word taxes, the young man grabbed the paper and began to read carefully. It turned out that from the first year of living on the island, one had to pay a tax to the city treasury. Flipping through the pages, he became worried. Would he be able to manage the farm, considering the size of the pastures? The tax was supposed to be huge, but seeing the amount, he was amazed at its cheapness. He even began to doubt whether the figures were recorded correctly. Sadia immediately understood his surprise. Such a small amount could be confusing, but there was an explanation. The calculation was accurate. The island was full of abandoned villages, so the land value was low. Taxes here turned out to be surprisingly lenient. The Lord even considered that this might be the cheapest estate in the entire country. Therefore, from the new year, he asked Lime to pay taxes regularly. No other changes were expected. Sadia was about to leave, asking to bring him the registration form as soon as the boy filled it out. Lime thanked him. Watching him with his eyes, the hero thought that even despite noble origin, the Lord did not have a carriage. He became curious about what he used for transportation. Ryu and Millie approached and asked Lime who that man was. He explained that he was a kind of master or leader of the entire island. The girl was surprised that this was possible, and Ryu, waving his hands, compared the boss to a criminal. He even imagined what would happen if he started demanding money from them and whether they could beat him. Lime strictly forbade any fights and explained that the Lord should be respected, as he would take care of them. But suddenly Millie asked the boy what was happening with the cow, and the young man looked at her in surprise. Millie said that every time she passed by the cow, it constantly rubbed against her. The girl did not understand what this could mean. The young man assumed that the animal probably wanted to be milked and decided to check. Approaching closer, he began to examine the condition of the cow. The girl noticed that the udder was very swollen. Lime decided that it should be milked twice a day because it recovered quickly. But he could not manage on his own, so the boy looked at the children and said that from now on they would also take part in milking. Ryu and Millie were confused because they did not know how to do it at all. The hero reassured them, promising to teach everything gradually. He gave the girl a clean towel and explained that first the udder should be wiped and then gently massaged with soft movements. Lime gave an example. The cow is like a princess, and she needs special care. Children with smiles held buckets full of milk and eagerly looked at how much they managed to milk. The boy was sure, if you take good care of the cows, they will give a lot of tasty milk. Millie tasted a little fresh milk and happily said that it was very delicious. Ryu decided that cows are truly amazing creatures, and Lime emphasized that the kindness they do for the animals will surely come back. The young man encouraged the children, urging them to try even harder next time. 3 days passed and the island resident registration form was ready. Lime took the document to Sadia's estate. He noticed that the aristocrat's house was extremely beautiful, and as a ruler, he had every right to it. Sadia came out onto the balcony and greeted the guest. The boy responded to the greeting and wanted to immediately get down to business with the documents, but the Lord stopped him, suggesting they first have some tea. The hero was surprised and hesitated, as he had many tasks on the farm, but the aristocrat insisted that it was all right. Lime thought that the children were watching the house and decided 1 cup of tea wouldn't hurt. The table was already set, and besides tea there were various treats on it. Sadia carefully served the guest, while admiring the weather, which seemed perfect for tea drinking outdoors. Lime was surprised. This was a real tea ritual. It would be rude to just take a cup without following the customs. Moreover, there were very tasty sweets on the table, which the boy dreamed of treating the children with. Sadia asked to relax, explaining that everything on the table he had prepared with his own hands. This impressed the young man, as the owner of the house seemed to enjoy working with his own hands. He leaned back in his chair and said that in the capital, he was always surrounded by servants and attendants, and this made his life uncomfortable. Lime noticed this young man did not behave like a typical aristocrat at all. He continued that nobles by birth live under the burden of rules and restrictions, which is why they receive education only at home. He explained too many rituals, endless overseers, reproaches, instructions, and terrible pressure. Because of this, the Lord always had to choose his words and behave restrainedly, regardless of the circumstances. Lime listened attentively, amazed by his frankness, and then Sadia shared a thought. He admitted that he often did not understand why he was doing all this at all. His life was a constant self-restraint. For an aristocrat, this seemed like a prison. At the moment he realized this, everything around lost its meaning. On the island, status and origin meant nothing, only actions mattered. This was exactly where he wanted to live freely. At the same time, he became the ruler of these lands. After that, he decided to change his surroundings and move permanently to the island. He liked the local order here, as all formalities had lost their meaning. He took real pleasure in seeing the locals savor their food and never lose the smiles on their faces. And Sadia also loved to sit quietly and rest from the heart. Lime listened to him attentively, slowly sipping tea. The Lord continued that he was tired of the city, overcrowded with rules, and was looking for a place where his soul could rest. The island turned out to be the best option. He poured hot tea again, telling how he decided to leave everything and settle here, in a new place. Lime agreed with his choice, considering it the right decision. The aristocrat laughed, but admitted that there was a downside. He was so comfortable here that he was afraid of forgetting all his manners. The hero respectfully thought about this man, who seemed to be a true connoisseur of delicious food. The low taxes were explained by the low price of the land, not by his grace. Lime could not even imagine that such sensible aristocrats existed in the world. It was truly interesting. Sadia finished his story and apologized for talking only about himself. Now it was time to listen to Lime. The Lord reviewed the documents and noted that the young man had traveled a lot and was a member of an adventurer's squad. But the hero clarified that everything was a bit different. Then he asked the aristocrat how he should address him. Sadia reminded that he had already spoken about this, but the boy was still hesitating. The young ruler repeated, "On his island there is no difference between nobles and common people, so let him be addressed by name. It can be shortened to Sati." Lime agreed, though uncertainly, but finally spoke his name. The Lord also wanted to learn more about the young man's adventures, but there was nothing to tell, especially after the exile. Hearing this, Sati noticeably became wary. He leaned forward, asking why it happened that way. Lime, in turn, asked in surprise what had confused him so much. Sati apologized. He was simply stunned by this news. He once again clarified whether Lema was really fired without any compensation, although he already knew about his skill from the documents. He sincerely did not understand how those people could expel the owner of such a rare ability. The young man hesitated, not knowing what to answer. The Lord looked over the papers again with surprise, carefully reading all the details. After all, good growth was an extremely valuable ability. He could only wonder, what did the squad members really think when they refused it? Sam Lime himself did not understand this either. He only recalled the mole's words before departure, saying that the level teams had reached the maximum. He told his interlocutor about this. When the squad members reached the border, his ability ceased to be needed, and there was no longer a place for him among them. Suddenly Sati asked whether Lime himself really understood his capabilities. He looked surprised, as he was convinced that a skill becomes useless once the highest limit is reached. The Lord stood up from his seat, and upon hearing this answer, invited the young man to go with him to the library. Arriving at the building, Lime looked with amazement at the numerous shelves of books, exactly what he expected from a nobleman. Sensing his thoughts, Sati explained that during the move they had to give up many books. He took one volume from the shelf and handed it to Lime. It was a skill reference book, the latest edition, containing all the abilities of the country. The boy immediately sat down right on the floor, and Sati suggested finding the description of good growth there. This skill tripled the development speed of a target within its range, reacting to external factors. Lime realized that it was thanks to this that everything around him grew so well, although he had not known this definition before. Looking more closely, he wondered, how did Krot and the others manage to grow so quickly in 2 years? The continuation said, if the target left the area of effect, a debuff was applied that reduced the growth speed threefold. The probability of the effect equaled the duration of staying outside the zone. The hero did not quite understand what a debuff was, and the Lord explained. As soon as the squad moved away from him, the skill's effect disappeared and development became negative. Then the process stopped, muscles weakened, and work capacity sharply declined. The boy was surprised that the effect was not permanent. Sati confirmed that was indeed the case. If a person received the good growth bonus for at least 2 months, they would later return to their previous state. However, the Lord believed, if the hero had been with them for 2 years, then now the adventurers would degrade for approximately the same amount of time. And he added, from now on they will have only negative growth, so it is quite likely that soon they will beg him to return. Lime was convinced. Probably, Krot and his comrades did not even know about this. After all, 2 years ago they were quite weak. When he named their leader, Sadia's face changed sharply, and he asked Lime again. As soon as the boy confirmed, the Lord grabbed him by the shoulders. With a dark look, he held the young man firmly, persistently questioning. Did he really join the squad exactly 2 years ago, neither earlier nor later? Lime became worried and began to choose his words confusedly. Sadia urged him to answer honestly, without any lies. If he lied, there would be no forgiveness. His piercing gaze seemed to see through the soul, and the hero had never felt such pressure before. Lime was afraid even to imagine what this man would do in case of a lie. Coming to his senses, he admitted that he told the pure truth. Sati finally calmed down and lowered his hands. He saw sincerity in his eyes and believed him. Thanking him for his honesty, he said he only wanted to make sure and suggested continuing the tea conversation. Lime began to ask many questions about noble behavior. Judging by Satia's reaction, he really was well informed about adventures, and he became interested to hear more. Returning to the table, the Lord took a sip of tea and remarked, "Krot and his people behaved foolishly, so it is no wonder they will get what they deserve." He assumed that they didn't even know the true features of good growth, which is why they kicked the boy out. However, something made him uneasy. Supporting his chin with his hand, he thoughtfully said that there was something strange here. After all, usually after being expelled, a person would take up another job and also develop like the rest. So he asked if Lime had trained and participated in fights, to which he received a denial. He was used only as a tool for leveling up. Sati became interested in other professions. Maybe he was offered at least some kind of work. Such opportunities really existed, but Krot forbade them every time, considering it unnecessary for their level. The Lord concluded, the squad deliberately did not want the young man to have his own money and experience. Lime became wary, not understanding exactly what the interlocutor meant. The aristocrat suggested he think about what it would be like if he did everything himself. Apparently, the comrades were afraid that otherwise they would not have time to raise their own levels, so they kept him close until reaching the top. Sati explained that was exactly why he was not allowed anything. On the contrary, they forced him to believe that without them he was incapable of anything. All this was done for their own benefit. Images of those people and their humiliating words surfaced again in Lime's memory. Blood boiled with indignation, and he struck the table forcefully with both fists, cursing in anger. Sati asked him not to be excessively angry. Such rage did not suit him. But the young man was overwhelmed by a dark wave, because how could he not be angry at those who so vilely took advantage of him? But the Lord himself did not consider exile from the squad a tragedy. On the contrary, he saw good in it, for it was fate that brought them together this way. Sati extended his hand to the hero, urging him not to worry. He would never drive him away without reason. Such people were needed by him. Lime was surprised but sincerely thanked him. Then the young man dared to ask a question, whether the Lord was acquainted with Krot. The aristocrat rose from the table and confirmed, yes, they really knew each other, but that was 3 years ago and had nothing to do with Lime. The boy thoughtfully wondered what had happened 3 years ago then. But it was too delicate a topic, and Sati did not want to touch on it. Moreover, the young man had no role there. Lime did not insist. After all, the Lord was right. He himself hoped never to meet Krot again. The aristocrat changed the subject, reminding the boy that he should make a list of needed things. He emphasized that probably necessary resources and children's clothes were required. Lime himself was embarrassed. To ask for everything at once would seem presumptuous, but Sati thought it better to clarify immediately, since it was not only about him. Some of the residents had already asked for help rebuilding houses, as with the arrival of grandchildren, there was not enough space. The boy inquired whether the Lord helped them. If the requests were reasonable, Sati did not refuse. Although he did not advise being too persistent, as it seemed intrusive, everything depended on the tax balance. He urged the hero not to be shy and to listen to his request. Lime was a bit embarrassed but still asked for a hammer. The Lord did not expect to hear that. The boy explained that it was lying in an old barn that was about to collapse from the slightest breath of wind. Sati understood everything. This directly concerned the arrangement of the pasture. The Lord clapped his hands in agreement and suggested not just to restore the barn, but to build a new shed and everything needed. Lime did not expect such broad plans. He even protested, saying that a simple repair would be enough for him, but Sati emphasized they were on an island. Masters and materials had to come from the mainland, so it was cheaper to do everything at once, and that sounded quite reasonable. And it was not only about Lime. For the Lord, it was also a profitable investment. The boy stayed on the island, took the farm under his care, and moreover had a rare ability. Most importantly, he possessed the good growth. If Sati had known the value of this skill immediately, he would never have neglected it. So he asked the young man to allow him to take care of him, and immediately moved on to discussing the order. Lime was confused. Everything was happening too fast. Could his skill really be so priceless? There was still so much he did not know about it. He wanted to clarify, but the interlocutor himself asked if there was anything else the young man wished to know. Dobry wrist was an impressive force, but not everyone could realize its significance. Lame doubted, but Sati unconditionally believed his words, as he had his own reason. The boy's eyes widened in surprise when the Lord confessed. His skill was prohibition of lies. Lame asked again, stunned, and he confirmed once more. In simple terms, he could see falsehood in others. The boy realized, so his words and ability were visible too. That is why Sati immediately understood that he was sincere. Thanks to this, he believed him without hesitation. The Lord was glad that the youth turned out to be honest, because if he had lied in the documents about the ability, it would have been considered a crime, and then Lame would have been instantly expelled from the island. But Sati's skill only allowed him to recognize lies and nothing more. That is why he was pleased to hear a truthful story from the youth. When he learned how exactly Lame ended up on the island, he rejoiced. Now they understood each other better. However, Lame was still worried about the question regarding Krot and the former squad. Curiosity did not give him peace. He doubted, even if he asked directly, Sati might refuse to answer, and it was not a fact that he would reveal the truth. The boy stood up, thanking for the tea. It was time for him to return to work. The Lord only apologized for keeping him. For farewell, Sati handed the young man a small bag and a book. Inside were sweets and a guidebook on abilities. Lime asked again if he could really take them. He thanked the hospitable host, promising that the children would be delighted. Sati, in turn, thanked him, wishing that he would study his power better from time to time. Returning to the farm, Lime found Millie and Ryu working. He called out that he was back to get their attention. Ryu immediately began scolding him for being late, and Millie was upset that he had been missing for so long. As an apology, Lime handed them the small bag, treating them to sweets from Mr. Sati. Then he reminded them to wash their hands, and the children obediently ran to the well. Returning, the brother and sister showed their clean hands and received their treats. In an instant, everything was eaten, and they immediately asked for more, but the boy replied that there was no more. Millie and Ryu were upset, realizing that they would have to be content with just that for the rest of the day. Lime pondered. Usually they did not have such delicacies, but he wanted to please the children more often. He needed to find a way. Meanwhile, far in the mountains, beyond the island of Harmoa, a former group of adventurers began to decline. Their powers betrayed them at the most critical moment. Before three people stood a huge monster emitting hissing sounds. They stood below, and one of them shouted that it was impossible. The second cursed because their attacks did not even harm such a dragon, and the girl nearby clenched her teeth irritably. The monster's paw crashed down right on them, and the three jumped back with frightened cries. Jack shouted to Mole, but he screamed that he couldn't do anything, ordering Jack and Emily to retreat. The boy noticed with horror. Lately, fighting had become suspiciously difficult. They should have defeated a dragon of this level in a few minutes, so what is happening? Already in shelter, Jack slammed his fist on the table, cursing and shouting what kind of damn nonsense this was. Emily also didn't understand. Her magic stopped working, which had never happened before. He didn't want to believe it, but still assumed. They needed to check the level. Emily asked again, and Jack replied that they were supposed to be at the maximum. Mole, mumbling, ordered to bring the level counter. The girl didn't understand why, but complied. Such devices were usually found in large hotels. Jack said uncertainly that once a level is gained, it doesn't drop, but his eyes widened in horror when the device showed only 65. In anger, he pushed Mole away, shouting that it was a lie, and checked himself, but both he and Emily had the same level. The girl, touching the sphere, shouted that it was a mistake. Jack asked if the device was broken, but Mole replied that everything was real. They really had weakened, and he didn't understand why. The last time he checked, the level was 100. It was then that he expelled Lime, and now his power stopped working. Mole began to suspect. Good growth supported their levels only when near him. Could it really have worked that way? Emily asked if he was serious, and Jack refused to believe it. The girl got angry, then maybe they should bring him back. Mole was surprised how to do that. They didn't even know where he was now, and returning with a plea would mean losing dignity. But Emily shouted that without him, they couldn't cope with the dragon, and therefore, no more S-rank missions awaited them. Fearfully, she added, worse, they could fall to the same level as Lime. All three looked at each other in horror. Jack stated that he could not go back. At that time, he barely earned a living, but now he finally lived like a nobleman. How could one return to poverty again? He paused for a moment and cast suspicion. Maybe Lime knew everything in advance and just sat nearby, waiting for them to reach the summit to leave. Then it turns out he is to blame for everything. Emily shouted that it was so. He had to warn. It was his responsibility. She attacked Mole, demanding to immediately return Lime, since he is obliged to answer for the consequences. Jack agreed, and Mole only grumbled that it was easy to say, but because of this situation, they definitely would not manage to submit the assignment on time. He added finding Lime would not be easy, but if they constantly pressure him, he will break. Once they made him completely dependent. In the worst case, they could negotiate and pay him well. But now it was clear they would not overcome the current task. The dragon was too strong, so they would have to postpone it. 2 months passed. People looked at the new house with surprise and exclaimed enthusiastically what a wonderful job it was. The young man, shielding his eyes with his palm from the sun, said with a smile that he also contributed to the project. Lime thanked him but became interested in one detail. The hero noted that thanks to the help, this house turned out better than any estate. The young man replied that he was only a good sponsor and asked for permission to stay overnight. Lime gladly agreed. Meanwhile, the children jumped on the soft bed, rejoicing in the new conditions. And that was not counting the new barn and cow stable, as well as a completely fresh chicken coop. Actually, the idea with the chicken belonged to Sati himself. When asked why suddenly, he explained, when there is both milk and eggs, you can make many delicious dishes, and Lime would definitely like that. He replied that he was truly glad. Sati showed a basket from which chicks were peeking out. Lime was stunned, and Millie screamed with delight. They are so cute. She grabbed Lime by the sleeve, begging to be allowed to take care of them, and he immediately agreed. Thanks to the girls' care and the effect of good growth, the chickens grew remarkably fast and now laid eggs every day. Things were getting better and better. The children brought the hero a can of milk and a basket of eggs, offering to make omelets or pancakes. Lime replied that both options sounded wonderful. Sati asked if it was time for lunch. Looking back, the young man said that it was enough for today, and next week he would order more milk from them. Finally, they started selling products. The cows had grown, there was much more milk, and its quality was impeccable, as confirmed by Sati. Everything went surprisingly smoothly. They received good reviews, and thanks to trade, could buy vegetables, flour, and even livestock. Lime looked at the house and quietly admitted that he had long forgotten the taste of omelets and pancakes. Suddenly he heard a scream. Some young man was running straight towards him, loudly apologizing and begging to sell him milk. Running up, he explained that he had heard about the extraordinarily tasty milk from Harmoa Island and wanted to buy it for his master. Lime confusedly asked him not to shout like that. But the boy insisted that they sell him everything that was left. The hero thought that he was probably crazy. The young man kept repeating that he had heard about the special taste of the milk and was ready to buy it all. Lime tried to calm him down, reminding him that such exclamations only scare the cows. The hero did not understand who this person was at all, although he looked decent. He explained that the milk still needed to be sterilized, and sales would start at noon, but the guest shouted that he could not wait. After all, boiling takes from half an hour to 40 minutes. Lime firmly replied, they do not sell raw milk, but the boy snatched the bucket from his hands, shouting that then he would just pay and take it now. The hero asked what he was doing, and he replied that he had to get milk for his master at any cost. Lime watched as the bucket swayed and was about to spill. He did not understand why he should suffer because of this at all. Suddenly, someone called him from the side. It turned out that something was wrong with the cow Shiro. Distracted, he accidentally dropped the bucket from his hands, and the persistent guest stepped back. As a result, the bucket fell on his head, and the milk spilled. Lime only cursed inwardly, seeing how the fresh product was wasted in vain. The children ran up, shouting for him to save them faster because Shiro would trample them all. Lime asked to wait. In fact, this cow had a gentle nature and got its name from Millie because of its white color. Hiding the children behind him, the hero said not to make noise so as not to irritate the animal even more. He smiled and gently addressed Shiro, asking what had happened. The cow responded with a prolonged moo. Lime calmed her down, saying that everything was fine. There was nothing strange here except for this eccentric man, and he would deal with him himself. He asked Shiro to return to the barn, and she obediently went. Sighing with relief, the boy wiped the sweat from his forehead and noticed that the guest was still lying on the ground. Lime took the bucket off him and asked if he was okay. The man, still in shock, muttered, "What was that just now?" The hero explained that he had fainted and offered to take the leftover milk. The man shouted, asking if there was really no more ready milk. Lime replied that there would have been, if he himself hadn't spilled it all. The stranger cried, confessing that he had come all the way from the capital just for this milk, to which Lime just shrugged. He was simply unlucky. The man left, angry, blaming Lime for everything and promising to report him to his lord. Millie didn't understand what was wrong with him, and Ryu mockingly suggested pushing the eccentric guest, but the hero calmly replied that this should not be done. He calmed the children, explaining that there was still time to collect the milk, and the most important thing was that no one was hurt. Lime sternly warned, if the cow really got angry, it would be impossible to stop her, so voices must be kept quiet. He added that running away was not an option, and one must act gently and carefully. When the children nodded, Lime smiled and suggested going to eat together. choosing between making omelets or pancakes. A week passed. Lime brought Sati a can of milk, explaining that it was their weekly supply. The young man was surprised by the quantity, not expecting to see so much. The hero agreed, adding that recently the yields had increased significantly, and now all the island's inhabitants bought the milk. But there is a limit to how much people can drink or use. Sati noted that the surplus could become a problem. The nobility have ice chambers, but usually milk is stored at room temperature. Lime recalled how in his past world refrigerators existed. The hero suddenly asked if Sati had such a camera. He confirmed, and Lime also asked for some sugar. Hearing this, the host immediately guessed what he was planning. He clarified whether Lime really wanted to prepare something special. The hero nodded. You can make a very tasty thing from dairy leftovers. Sati agreed and allowed the use of the chamber and his supplies. No need to thank me, he said. Just share the treat with me later, and he led the guests to the pantry. There they were given sugar and shown the chamber. Lime began to boil the milk, stirring continuously to prevent it from burning. When it acquired a caramel hue and began to thicken, he poured the mixture into molds and took it to cool. To Sati's question, he explained that it was fresh caramel. Once set, it could be cut and eaten in pieces. The impressed host assured that he had never seen anything like it and called it a dish of lame himself. He did not object, although the recipe came from his past life. Later it was time to return to the farm. Lime informed about it but heard Sati calling him. The young ruler inquired whether he had enough other ingredients and if he could prepare something more than sweets. Lime asked again in surprise. Sati remembered the new trend on the continent, pie with whipped cream and butter. He called it extremely tasty. The hero replied that the ingredients are available, but it will be difficult without a recipe. Then Sati decided to make a drawing, a round pie with creamy filling. Looking at it, Lime began to remember. He realized that it resembled moritozo, a popular dessert from his world, like a miracle that it exists here. The hero admitted he would try it, although he was not sure of his baking skills. Sati suggested turning to the local baker Tommy, the only one on the island, but Lime hesitated. It seemed wrong to him to pull a person away from work because of a whim. He explained that he wants to focus on products made from excess milk, and bread doesn't really fit here. Upset, Sati reproached that the hero gives up on everything after so many of his efforts. He added that he put in so much effort and money to support him, and only asked for one pie in return. Such pressure made Lame feel that refusal was impossible. Eventually he agreed, promising to try. Sati joyfully hugged him and said that it made him extremely happy. He thanked Lame, explaining that this pie reminded him of the last moment with his mother. She was a strict woman but actually gentle. They ate that pie together, and the memory was especially precious. Lame understood his feelings. Sati asked to make every effort and promised to definitely taste the caramel. The hero thought that it was like soft blackmail, but did not argue. At home he firmly decided, if these memories are important to Sati, he must try. He mixed dough from flour, sugar, salt, added yeast, milk, and eggs, kneading thoroughly without lumps. When it was time for the butter, he added it to the dough and rolled out the mass. Ryu, interested, came over and asked what he was doing. Lime explained that he was baking a pie for Mr. Sati. The children wanted to help, but he decided to make caramel separately for them. Then the dough was left to rest, divided into portions, and taken to Tommy for baking. He apologized to the baker, explaining that the Lord himself demanded it. Tommy accepted the order with a smile and got to work. Meanwhile, Lime was whipping cream at home. He added sugar and whipped until the crystals dissolved. His hands ached from the strain, but he stubbornly did not stop, understanding that time was pressing. A scene from the past world surfaced in memory, an automatic mixer that did everything by itself. Here, it even lacked a magical tool. However, after long work, the buttercream was ready, just in time when Tommy baked the bread. Lime cut the fresh bread in half, filled it with tender cream, and sprinkled sugar on top. For a moment, Sati looked at the finished dessert with disbelief, as if he couldn't believe it really turned out. He enthusiastically said that Lime is a true genius. He modestly replied that he was glad to hear that, but he could not make such desserts all the time, as they take too much time and effort. The master sincerely thanked the hero for putting in so much effort for his request and impatiently asked if he could try it. Lime allowed it, understanding that this taste was more important to Sati than anything else. In the garden they sat at the table, and Sati stuck a fork into a piece of tender dessert. It was the same maritazo, the last taste he once shared with his mother. The hero was anxious whether he managed to recreate this memory. The young aristocrat put a piece into his mouth and trembled, his eyes moistened with emotion. Putting down the fork, he smiled and admitted that the taste was familiar. He thanked Lame, saying that it turned out surprisingly tasty. The hero also smiled, but Sati unexpectedly admitted that this dessert was even better than the one he had tasted before, which impressed Lame. The master said that at that time his mother did not have much time left, and he asked the cook to make the cream lighter so as not to burden her body. He always cared about her health. But already a week after that meal, his mother passed away, and Sati still regretted it. He felt that she would have loved exactly that kind of pie. He asked Lame to prepare one more to place in front of her portrait. The hero agreed, rejoicing that he was able to give the young lord something so important. Sati sighed and apologized for his frankness. Lime assured that it was natural and suggested trying the caramel. The host immediately recognized the sweets prepared earlier. Putting a piece into his mouth, he froze in surprise. The caramel, hard in appearance, melted like air, and Sati admiringly admitted that he had never tasted such a texture. He said it was extraordinarily tasty and that such a thing could be sold along with tea. Lime supported the idea, suggesting trying to implement it for the island's residents. But Sati stopped him, asking about the price. The hero replied that for locals it would be lower, but he heard a warning: sugar is too expensive, so such trade might prove unaffordable. Lime realized he had completely forgotten about the cost of sugar and storage expenses. Sati advised focusing on aristocrats, and the hero admitted that this was indeed logical. However, he sighed, he only wanted to get rid of excess milk, but now everything was turning into a complicated trade affair. Moreover, the only rich man on the island was Sati himself. Remembering that he belonged to the nobility, Lime directly asked if he could help reach the mainland aristocrats. The host asked again if the hero truly desired this. Lime confirmed, both milk and caramel are good products, but they should be used wisely. He would like to trade himself, but was afraid to leave the children unattended. Sati promised to consider the proposal and advised giving him time, as he has people who can help. The hero thanked him and apologized for the burden, but heard in response that his merits were already too great, and if the trade brings profit, it benefits everyone. The host offered him to try a special tea today, blended from several varieties. Lime apologized, explaining that he had to hurry home, the children were waiting. Sati was upset but said with a smile that then they could arrange a tea ceremony another time, even at his home. Lime jokingly replied that it would be better to do it at the farm. Hearing this, Sati unexpectedly declared that he would spend the night with them to see their work. The hero was stunned, not knowing if he was serious. And the master did not even give him time to object. He hurried to leave, promising to bring tea and sweets that would surely please the children. Returning, Lime told Millie and Ryu why Sati decided to stay. The master greeted them and caused genuine surprise among the little ones. He showed a table piled with sweets and said that all this was for them. The children were so happy that they almost jumped for joy, asking if they could eat everything at once. Lime noted that they should work first, since Sati wanted to see their farm. The children agreed and, taking him by the arms, asked him to stay longer. The hero looked surprised at such closeness. Ryu set about milking the cows, and Millie proudly showed the chickens. Later, Sati poured tea into cups, watching their life. When evening fell on the island, everyone sat at the table. Lime felt that sometimes such peaceful moments with tea and family warmth were the best rest. About a week later, Lime and Sati were sitting in the garden, and the young master enthusiastically praised the wonderful cheesecake that melted in the mouth. That day, besides collecting milk, the hero tried to make a baked cheesecake. The recipe was simple: cream cheese, sugar, eggs, flour, a little cream, and lemon juice, all mixed thoroughly. Then he crushed cookies, mixed them with melted butter, laid it in a mold, poured the main mixture on top, and put it in the oven until done. Sati called Lime a genius because he created one masterpiece after another. In fact, it was a recipe from a previous life. Lime noted that sugar was almost finished, and Sati promised to bring cane sugar. The young master thought aloud that it would be good to invite more suppliers, but Lime thought differently. Milk production was growing, and even processing it into butter and cheese daily did not solve the surplus problem. If this continued, people would really have to pour out milk, and not only on his farm. Sati suggested using some of the corn. But he himself could not consume so much, and the peasants still only shared the surplus. He wanted to support Lame. He replied that in his house food is always shared together. Sati was surprised to hear this, and realized that it was also the effect of his skill, good growth. However, now was not the time to delve into details. He suggested giving the corn to the cows. The hero objected. The livestock's diet is balanced in nutrients. You can't just throw extra vegetables to them. Sati agreed to rely on his knowledge. It turned out that the corn and milk would have to be thrown away, and at that very moment, a familiar greeting sounded. Sati was surprised because he saw an old acquaintance. In front of him stood Rode, son of Rembrandt. He greeted him and said that he had finally found time to visit him. Rode arrived without warning, explaining that he had some free time. Sati was sincerely glad, though he understood how tiring the journey from the mainland was. Lime immediately guessed that this guest was also an aristocrat. Sati noticed that he had few friends among the nobility, but this one was especially close. Lame wanted to leave so as not to disturb their conversation. But Sati stopped him, suggesting to have tea together and introduce them. Lime refused, saying he needed to take care of the cows. Hearing this, Rode was surprised. He asked again if Lime really manages the local estate, and if he is the same owner of the rare skill Good Growth, which was highly valued. Jokingly, Rode offered him a position with a salary of 100,000 gold coins per month. Lime flinched in shock, but heard that it was only a joke, because otherwise Sati himself would have killed him for such a stunt. This hero laughed awkwardly. But seriously, Lame's skill is truly invaluable. Rode even remembered that he had to apologize to him, although Lame did not understand why. Rode called his servant named Frank. The hero immediately recognized this man. Frank stood behind, not taking his eyes off Lame. The hero approached closer and made sure, yes, it was the same impudent fellow who recently caused a commotion on the farm. He was the one who almost spilled the milk then, creating a mess. And now Lame learned that he was Rhoda's servant, which was unpleasantly surprising. Rhoda, realizing that his subordinate caused inconvenience, ordered him to apologize. After a pause, Frank sharply exclaimed his apologies. He explained that his master was interested in the milk from this island, so he hurried to be first. He wanted to be helpful, but only caused trouble. Frank admitted that he ruined everything and asked for forgiveness. Lame replied that he had already heard everything and there was no need to shout. Frank added that he remained in service only thanks to the kindness of his master and thanked him. Rode slapped him on the head. He exclaimed another apology, and Rode, sighing, promised to better educate the servant so that no more problems would arise. Lame only nodded. Then Rode handed the hero a pouch. Inside were gold coins. Lame exclaimed in surprise, assuring that the apologies were enough. But Rode insisted, the servant's mistake is the master's responsibility, and this must be well understood. Sati also added that refusal is not allowed, as these are the rules. If a subject of one master behaves rudely to a subject of another, the apology must be proper. Refusal would only offend. Lame realized the seriousness of the situation and bowed, thanking Rode. He asked permission to spend this money on food and tools for the household. Rodiak agreed with a smile and wished Lame success in farming. The hero began to understand why the servants loved their master so much. He truly had a big heart. Lime thought most aristocrats are arrogant and unpleasant, but next to Sati, he did not feel this cold superiority, and this completely changed his attitude. Sati remembered the dessert that Lime had prepared and advised Rodi to try it together with milk tea. He enthusiastically supported the idea. The young gentleman invited Lame to stay for tea, but the hero refused. The children were waiting at home, and if he was late, they would quarrel. Sati only sighed, saying it was always more fun with him. The hero was surprised why it was more fun with him, since he didn't even tell interesting stories. But Sati simply wished him good luck at work. Lime thanked him and set off on the road. Already leaving, he heard how Sati invited Rodi to stay overnight. He agreed and even added that he would spend a few days here. Sati was sincerely glad, as he had important matters with him. Returning home, Lime felt Millie's joyful greeting. Glancing around the yard, he praised her for the wonderful work, and the girl beamed with gratitude. Millie and Ryu learned remarkably quickly. Now they could light a fire, extinguish the stove, and even pasteurize milk on their own. The hero praised the girl for preparing a bucket of water in case of fire. Ryu carried the buckets, proudly announcing that he had milked the cows himself. Lime smiled and praised him, although he noted that he does it too often. The boy just shrugged. That's how it turns out. The hero explained that excessive milking is not good. You stop, and the cow will get mastitis, but excesses also become a problem. Ryu noticed that after milk, he feels a surge of strength, and Millie added that her hair and skin also shine. The hero truly saw the children were always cheerful and healthy, and he himself felt wonderful. The milk was remarkably nutritious, and he often heard similar feedback from customers. People said that after their milk they felt better, children recovered faster, and the skin became clearer. The quality was impeccable, but another problem arose: where to put the surplus. If it were possible to sell on the mainland, everything would be easily resolved, but on the island there was limited demand and difficulties arose. The next day Lema was called. Sati was glad to see him, and Rodi remembered that the hero wanted to talk about something. Lame apologized for the suddenness and placed buckets of milk on the floor. Rodi was impressed by his yield today. The hero explained that they had started pasteurizing the milk, pouring it into jars and selling it. Rodi asked if it was difficult to sterilize such volumes, but Lame replied that it was not a problem. only a pity to pour out the excess. Rhodey asked skeptically if he really poured it out. Lame nodded. On the island it was impossible to use everything. Even in products milk was used in limited quantities. Hearing this, Rhodey only sighed with relief. Then he asked if Lame could sell him the surplus, or rather, supply milk to his lands. The hero was stunned. He hesitated whether it was really possible to do this. Sati explained that he had long written to Rhodey about the milk and knew his interest. Rhodey admitted that he could not agree until he checked everything with his own eyes. That is why he came personally, and yesterday had the opportunity to taste the milk and was delighted. He drank so much tea with milk that he could not stop, and in the evening Sati even ordered cream soup. Rhodey admitted that it was incredibly tasty. In any case, he saw the point in supplying such a product to his region and wanted to make a deal. The hero did not hide his surprise. Sati handed him the contract and asked him to read it carefully and give an answer. Lame thanked him for the care, and Sati just joked, saying he sent a few letters, and that was all. But in fact, the initiator was Rhodey, since he conducted all the negotiations. Embarrassed, he asked not to praise him anymore, as it was only a coincidence of shared interests. The hero was touched. Lime sincerely thanked for the help. Rhodey explained that the contract is still preliminary, and if the price or conditions are not suitable, everything can be discussed. The hero pondered the price. He did not want to overcharge them, but undercharging was also dangerous. Looking at the figures, Lime asked Mr. Rembrandt with doubt if he was sure about such a price. Rhodey replied that even this amount is 3 times the cost of milk for the locals. Sati assumed that the hero simply does not know the market price and therefore doubts. He explained that on the mainland fresh milk is valued more highly than beer or even wine. Lime was stunned by this news. It turned out that during times of shortage, stable milk supplies are especially important. The price then soars, and discarding surpluses would be pointless. Sati supported Rhodey, acknowledging his correctness. He added that the issue is not with strange prices. On the contrary, Lime underprices them too much. For the island residents, such a price is still acceptable, but selling on the mainland must be at market price. If set lower, it will collapse the market and harm other dairy farms. It is better to stick to the price, since the Rembrandt family is wealthy and can bear the costs. Rhodey suggested, if the hero agrees to the terms, let him sign the contract. Lime agreed, remembering how recently he found himself on the island without a penny in his pocket. Now, having achieved success on the almost abandoned pasture, he felt true pride. And all this became possible thanks to the people he met on the island. The contract was signed, and Rhodey immediately appointed the person responsible for transporting the milk. He entrusted this matter to Frank, which did not please Lime very much. A month passed and his premonitions came true. Frank turned out to be a miserable worker. He spilled milk, constantly made noise, and disturbed the work, failing even with simple tasks. Ryu eagerly asked the hero how much longer they would tolerate Frank, as his screams made their heads spin. Millie also could not stand him. But although the children worked much better, Frank was a person appointed by Lord Roderick himself. Lime only reassured them, if he gets used to it, maybe everything will get better, it's worth enduring. The upset children went to the chickens and cows, and the hero silently watched them. In fact, he himself was already losing patience and thought about talking to Sati, but suddenly a scream sounded from behind. It was Frank shouting again, announcing that there was food on the table. Lime asked him to be quiet, but he shouted fearfully that a huge beetle appeared in the field. The hero asked again. Frank, trembling, called for help. Millie approached Lime and asked what had happened. He replied that probably he saw an insect, but beetles always appear. Lime did not understand why Frank was so scared until he himself heard a strange sound from the field. He decided to check and, going out, really saw a giant beetle. But it was not just a beetle, it was a monster. Millie said fearfully that it would destroy all the vegetables. Lime hesitated. He could not defeat such a monster alone. Maybe it was worth calling the hero from the mainland. But there was no time. The harvest and livestock could suffer right now. At that moment, Ryu called out to him, asking if Frank was shouting again. The hero sharply ordered the boy to stay away, but he did not understand why. Lime asked if he did not see the giant beetle in front of him. And then Ryu, instead of fear, exclaimed with delight how cool it was. Lime and Millie were stunned, and the boy approached the monster and offered it a bucket of milk. The beetle accepted it, loudly slurping, and made a sound similar to KUVA. Petting the monster, Ryu said it was incredible and even suggested using its strength to carry logs. The hero was shocked. After all, it was supposed to be a monster. But the beetle easily lifted the logs, and the boy immediately invited it to help on the farm. Ryu begged to keep the beetle, promising to take care of it. Lime did not know what to think, when suddenly Sati appeared behind them. He said he had heard about the incident on the farm and confirmed. Before them was Hercules. Yesterday, a report came in about the appearance of a monster near the port. It was a type of rhinoceros beetle, which is called Hercules here. It is a vegetarian and usually peaceful. The hero asked if it could be tamed if it was not dangerous. Sati replied that he did not recommend it because it was too big. Moreover, such a creature could scare the cows, and if it suddenly broke loose, become truly dangerous. Lime agreed with him and told Ryu that this time Sati was right. Ryu got angry, not wanting to drive the beetle away, since it was obedient and submitted to him. Lime tried to reach the boy, explaining the danger if the monster suddenly went mad, but Ryu insisted that this would not happen, otherwise the beetle would simply be nowhere. The boy exclaimed that even the hero himself was once driven away. Does he want to repeat the same fate with the beetle? Lime froze. Their stories really seemed similar. He imagined what would happen if Hercules was driven away. He would start wandering through other farms, snooping in storerooms and taking food by force. Then the hero decided that it was better to feed him himself and give him a useful task. Ryu declared that if the beetle was driven away, he would also leave with it. Lime shifted his gaze to Sati, who sighed heavily, understanding how delicate the situation was. The young master admitted that there was no other way, but asked to remember, the island needs a hero. Lime apologized and assured Ryu that he did not want to lose him. So he announced that now Ryu himself was responsible for the beetle and had to promise to watch over it. The boy joyfully shouted that now Hercules would stay with them. Touching the beetle's leg with his palms, Ryu exclaimed that now they would work together at full strength. The hero noticed how the boy changed before his eyes and realized that he had no choice but to accept the new strange friend on the farm. A few days later, Sati inquired how things were going and what about the monster. Lime replied that it was diligently helping, carrying loads and loosening the soil. Sati asked if it was really so gentle, but still asked to be careful. Lime admitted that the main problem now was not the beetle, but Franco. Sati inquired what had happened, and Lime said directly, everything is bad, he is not coping with the work. He dared to ask his friend if he could ask Lord Roderick to replace Frank. Sati promised to try, although there was little hope. He added that in his opinion, Rhodey perfectly understood what Frank would turn out to be, but appointed him for a certain reason. Lime was surprised. Sati explained, Rhodey's skill is called Talent Overview. It allows one to immediately determine a person's abilities and character, so he could not have been unaware of the servant's true suitability. Lime did not understand the logic of this decision, but Sati also admitted that not everything was clear. He promised to talk to his friend, and if he did not change his decision, they would have to put up with it. Sati suggested thinking about how to get along with Frank and promised to help. Several days passed, but nothing changed. It became clear that Roderick was not going to change his choice, and the hero did not know what to do with this burden. And just then, in the main port of the island, someone called out to Frank, asking if he knew the way to the farm. He gladly confirmed and said that he was coming from there so he could lead the guests. Maul thanked him, noting that it was a great help. And in a moment, Lime found himself in front of old acquaintances. Maul greeted him, noting that he had not seen him for a long time and now saw him as the farm manager. The hero recognized him immediately. Frank cheerfully added that these people themselves asked to be shown the way, and he, as a good guy, fulfilled the request. After that, he carried the milk further. Lime found it hard to believe. These three really appeared here. They had become very thin, even Jack and Emily, although only half a year had passed. It was an obvious action of the negative effect of his skill. To the hero's question about what they needed, Maul replied that he would also have to explain, since the culprit himself must know everything. He accused Lame of vile manipulation of power and demanded an explanation of how he deceived him. The hero firmly denied it, explaining that he learned about the true properties of the skill only after arriving on the island. Mole grabbed him by the clothes, shouting fiercely that these excuses would not work because they had suffered terrible losses because of him. Lime asked in surprise what exactly was meant. Jack interrupted, saying everything is simple, and Emily suggested that he just return to their group. Maul added that even if he is a weakling, they will allow him to be a servant. The hero looked at them with cold skepticism and clarified if he had heard correctly. After all, they were the ones who mercilessly exploited his power, called him a parasite, and then abandoned him to his fate. And now, having lost progress, they return because they cannot rise on their own and still have the audacity to blame him. This was already complete nonsense. Mole wanted to propose cooperating again, but the hero interrupted him, ordering him to leave. He refuses. The team was stunned. Mole irritably asked again if Lime really thinks he has a choice. but the boy exclaimed that he is now a resident of the island, has a passport from the Lord, and runs the farm. He cannot leave it. Mole sighed, accusing the hero of hiding behind Lord's power, calling it cowardice. With feigned indulgence, he said he was giving him time to cool down, which only made Lame angrier. The fly added that even a fool like Lime will soon realize who is right, and while they go to grab a bite, they will wait for his answer. The hero was shattered by the fact that these people appeared and began demanding their due. In anger, he stomped the ground and shouted, but his decision remained unchanged. No. When the children ran up, Ryu asked what had happened. Lime assured them that everything was fine and it was not a problem. He remembered that he must inform Sati. He told the children that he would be away for a while. Later, Sati asked in surprise if it was true that those people were on the island. The hero confirmed and added that the Lord had nothing to worry about. He would stay on the farm. Lime promised that he would drive them away later, but Sati suddenly declared that there was no need to expel them. The hero was surprised and asked why then they needed to be detained. Sati explained that the matter concerned not only him, but also Roddy. The hero was surprised what relation Lord Rembrandt had to this. Sati apologized, saying it was a secret. He would go to Roddy, and Lime in the meantime had to detain the arrivals for at least 2 days. The hero was confused. There were no hotels on the island, so it turned out he would have to host them himself. Sati only replied that he was counting on him. Lime did not understand how it happened. He wanted to get rid of those scoundrels, but now he had to keep them close. Why did Sati get involved with them, and why was he waiting for Roddy? He could barely stand the sight of their faces himself, but he would have to endure these 2 days. And then he heard a scream from the side. Lime recognized the voice. It was Ryu shouting at someone. The boy shouted why the adults were beating his friend. After all, it was a monster he had tamed. Mal coldly replied that they were only cleansing the land of the monster because their elite team was engaged in this, and the peasants should be thankful. Ryu wanted to insult them, but his mouth was covered. Lime asked him to restrain himself, but still admitted that the boy was right. They behaved too arrogantly. The hero shouted that they should not dare insult his relatives and the monster who had become part of the family. Mal replied that if Lime had returned, there would have been no such noise. He asked about the decision and even promised to pay. Lime shouted in response that he would not go because he has a farm. Emily got angry, but Mal stopped her, saying that Lime would still think about it. Then he stated that since there are no hotels on the island, they would stay in his house because heroes should be received with hospitality. The hero recalled Sati's order. He agreed, saying that they could use it as they wished, because refusal would cause problems for all the residents, but the children were categorically against it. Lime added that he himself did not want this either, so they should spend the night together with him and the children. They accepted the conditions, and night came. The hero apologized to the children for the anxiety. Ryu replied that everything was fine, but he did not like that Lime was suffering because of these people. Millie asked if they really wanted him to go with them. Maybe he could disappear for a short time and return, and they would take care of the cows in the meantime. The boy hugged them, thanking them, even worrying. They think about him first. He said that everything would be fine, that he loves them and will always stay close. Ryu recalled the old straw scarecrow and said that this trouble reminded him of those times. Lime also remembered how he made that doll when they first met. Hugging the children, he suggested going to sleep because there was a lot of work again tomorrow. The next 2 days, Mal and his companions constantly got underfoot and disturbed. Lime even had to feed them. Sati still had not returned, and the hero's patience was running out. On the morning of the 3rd day, they came again, and Mal asked if he had changed his mind. Lime replied that he was busy and asked not to be disturbed. Mal shouted indignantly, asking if he could at least listen. Jack called him an idiot who was useless to reason with. Jack decided to resort to rough methods, and Emily agreed. The hero was shocked. These self-styled heroes raised weapons against an ordinary person. Lime shouted, "Are they not ashamed? They themselves cannot live up to their own word, so why should he listen to them at all?" Jack got completely angry, grabbed an axe, and promised to teach him with pain. The hero suddenly noticed that Jack's movements were too slow. He clearly saw the trajectory of the axe and, as if time had slowed down, managed to punch the opponent in the face. Emily and Mal were stunned by what they saw. Lime did not understand what was happening. They had become too weak, and he had toughened up working on the farm. Could they really have lost so many levels? Emily shouted for him to stop immediately, or she would use magic. Hearing this, the hero became alert, and angry Emily was dangerous. But at that moment, a voice sounded from the side. "It's too loud here, what are you doing?" Emily turned around and asked the stranger who he was. Sati replied that when you ask for a name, you must first politely introduce yourself. because these are the basic rules of decency.